It's late. You've answered every message, you've scrolled past every face you know, and still, something in your chest feels hollow the way it does hours after skipping a meal. You tell yourself you're just tired, but your brain is running an older program than you realize, and it doesn't distinguish between an empty stomach and an empty room. Loneliness doesn't feel like sadness. Not exactly, it feels like hunger. A dull ache that sits low and won't go away no matter how many times you check your phone. That similarity isn't a coincidence, and it isn't poetic exaggeration, it's neurology. In the early 2000s, a researcher named Naomi Eisenberger ran an experiment that changed how scientists think about social pain. She placed people in brain scanners and had them play a simple digital ball tossing game with 2 other players. What the participants didn't know was that the other players were computer programs, and partway through the game quietly excluded them. No explanation, the ball just stopped coming their way. Inside the scanner, something remarkable happened. The brain region that lit up wasn't some abstract emotional center. It was the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that activates when your body registers physical pain. Being left out of a make-believe ball game triggered the same neural alarm as a burn or a bruise. Your brain, it turns out, never built a separate system for social rejection. It borrowed the one it already had for physical injury, because for most of human history, being cut off from other people was a physical injury waiting to happen. Think about what solitude actually meant 100,000 years ago. There were no locks on doors, no supermarkets, no emergency numbers to call. A human alone on the savannah was a human without a lookout, without help carrying food, without anyone to warn them about the shape moving in the grass. Groups shared the labor of staying alive, they shared warmth at night and defense against predators and knowledge about which plants would kill you and which ones wouldn't. A person who wandered too far from the group or who was cast out of it faced a mortality risk that dwarfed almost anything else in their environment. So evolution did what it does best. It attached a punishment to the behavior it wanted to prevent. Hunger keeps you from starving by making an empty stomach unbearable. Thirst keeps you from dehydrating by making a dry throat impossible to ignore. And loneliness, by the same logic, keeps you from drifting away from the group by making isolation feel like something is actively wrong with you. That's the part most people never learn. Loneliness isn't a flaw in your personality, it isn't proof that something is broken inside you. It's a signal as old as hunger, telling you that a basic survival need isn't being met. The psychologist John Cacioppo spent decades studying this signal, and he described loneliness the way a physiologist might describe pain. Not as a mood, but as a biological alarm. In his research, chronic loneliness was linked to elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep, and inflammation levels that resembled what you'd see in people under sustained physical stress. The body, in other words, treats prolonged isolation the way it treats a wound that won't heal. There's a cruel twist to how this alarm behaves though. When you're actually hungry, food fixes it, eat, and the discomfort fades in minutes. Loneliness doesn't work that way. Cacioppo's studies found that chronically lonely people often become more socially cautious, not less. They start reading neutral interactions as rejection. A slow reply feels like disinterest. A quiet room feels like being unwanted. The alarm meant to pull you toward connection can end up pushing you further from it, because the nervous system, once it's been burned by isolation, starts bracing for it everywhere. This is where the starvation comparison stops being a metaphor and starts being almost literal. A starving body doesn't just want food, it becomes hyper-aware of it. Studies on famine conditions have shown that hungry people become fixated on thoughts of eating, more sensitive to images of food, more likely to notice it in their environment. Lonely brains do something eerily similar. Research using brain imaging has found that socially isolated people show heightened attention to social cues, faces, tone of voice, the flicker of a phone screen that might mean someone reached out. Your brain isn't just uncomfortable when you're lonely, it's scanning, searching, the same way a starving body searches for food. There's an evolutionary reason this search instinct exists, and it explains something strange about modern loneliness. In the environment your brain was built for, isolation was rare and usually temporary. A hunter separated from the group would eventually find their way back, or the group would come looking. The alarm was loud, but it was meant to be brief. It was never designed to run for months. It certainly wasn't designed to run inside a world where you can be surrounded by hundreds of online connections and still feel almost none of the biological comfort those ancient signals were built to reward. That's the mismatch at the center of modern loneliness. Your brain still measures closeness the way it did 50,000 years ago, through shared physical presence, eye contact, touch, the sound of another person breathing nearby. A text message can convey information. It rarely convinces the older parts of your brain that you are safe, so the ache stays. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the nervous system evolved for a world where a group of familiar faces was always within shouting distance, and it hasn't caught up to a world where distance no longer means danger the way it once did. Understanding this doesn't erase the discomfort, but it does something almost as useful. It reframes it. That heavy, hollow feeling isn't a personal failing creeping in on a quiet evening. It's an ancient survival mechanism doing exactly what it was built to do, just in a world it was never designed for. The next time that hollow feeling shows up, late at night, in a room that suddenly feels too quiet, it might help to remember what it actually is. Not an empty stomach, an old signal inherited from ancestors who needed it to survive, still firing in a body that no longer lives among them, still asking the only question it has ever known how to ask. Where is everyone?